So the ego is just a really bad program that we've all inherited for interacting with each other. And to me, map consciousness is the map out of the ego. It's moving in a different dimension to map a different way to operate that's not based on the ego. But the trouble is the ego needs to be suspended in order to move in that map and actually map that territory by living in it. And when we first are in it, there are no rules. We don't have any rules established into how map consciousness operates through us and as us. And the ego isn't a thing that's ours, so we become free to make new maps. But there are certain limitations, and when we bump up against those limitations, that's when it becomes obvious to others that we're mapping something else, and they are uncomfortable because the rules we're creating are sometimes in opposition to the rules they operate by. And I'm not saying there's any right or wrong here, but it's just really interesting. And I think I was talking a little bit about the context I've created up to the point of moving myself out of the mental illness paradigm was really just stepping stones of context. And now I don't want to just create stepping stones of context. I want to create a context of paradise. So the stepping stones were just to get out of that prison. It's sort of like using the prison wall to build a bridge to freedom, to build a bridge out of the prison. And in that way, that context becomes obsolete. So maybe if people listen, it might provide some kind of stepping stone, but it's not it. It's just moving context forward to move further and further away from the context we were indoctrinated into when we were given a label. At some point, it sort of shrinks in its percentage of value and usefulness as one is able to continue to build new context. And one has to build one's own for oneself. That's sort of the point of this. And drop things as one goes along for oneself when it's time. If we build context for ourselves, we don't have to rely on the mental health languaging and context. It's sort of an ultimate safety net that creates a lot of problems with the way it helps, but it does create an overall somewhat helpful framework for a given amount of time. So one thing that was interesting about listening to the Ken Wilber podcast was that he said that people of integral consciousness, and that's his language, are able to recognize the value, or that there is value in everything of all the different levels and lines of development. And I sort of realized in that moment that this mental health paradigm is just a line of development that can be developed further. So the different stages of development of the paradigm have been somewhat helpful to some people over time, but it still needs to continue to develop. And somebody might start off in the psych ward and they're able to one day go on to be playing a role in the world that they exactly wanted as a child, or as they unfolded their life moving through that paradigm, and transcend it. My big qualm with it is that it traps people within the paradigm. If it offered 5 to 10 paths out of it, there's no real problem. But when it's limiting people, then there is a problem. And when it's harming people because of the way it's limiting people, partly because people who go through this a lot of times I feel are really connecting with their unlimited nature. So to be limited is going against the nature of the unfolding of the process. It's like saying, no, you're not unlimited. Here, take this and you'll feel better. No, you're not superhuman. No, you're not connecting with your gifts. No, you don't have subtle perceptions that could be rich for yourself and for maybe other people too. And I feel we can see a lot more than ourselves, than our ego structure, and through our ego structure. And we're learning to give voice to that. Just like the animal whisperer lady learned to give voice to these subtle perceptions she was having. I'm sure she didn't wake up one day and say, oh, the sharks are communicating with me. That's what it is. She probably went through being were speaking. And who is that speaking? What is that speaking? And people who are having subtle perceptions initially, maybe when they're not able to really connect with that energy and what is it exactly, it just eventually gets turned into and consolidated into, oh, I hear voices. Maybe that is just a very succinct way of saying, I'm connecting with subtle energies that are speaking things through me, like the sharks or the people homeless on the street or the fish or some type of animal or all of it. Whatever is there in the moment. That animal lady, she puts these animals in front of her and she's putting that in front of her in the moment. But if we don't go on a path of putting something particular in front of us in the moment to speak as, to have spoken through us, then it could actually be anything. And then if we're not able to understand, we're speaking as anything, we're speaking as the moment, we're speaking as the energy of the moment, then as time goes on and we're not able to understand that there is no ego, there is no person there, but it's what the moment gives voice to. If there's a resistance to that, or all of the energy that's put into all these campaigns about don't stigmatize this, everybody has a fear of these different types of perceptions. If there's no way to understand that, eventually, again, it gets consolidated in the same way that I'm seeing something beyond, I'm trying to give voice to it, gets turned into I'm seeing something, and now I'm voicing that I'm seeing something to a psychiatrist, and then they medicate me. The same thing could be true of hearing voices. We're hearing voices, we're hearing the voices of the moment. If I look at a lamp, I can understand the language of the lamp and maybe understand what went into putting it together, and I could speak to that, which is a language that was created in order for that lamp to come into being. And so I'm actually speaking for the lamp in a way. I'm speaking as the process of the lamp. But we always feel like we have to be speaking about this ego self and our memories. But when we get bored of that, frankly, anything else can speak through us. But if we don't really understand that, and understand we can speak as any subtle perception in the moment, and we don't speak them, or we don't share them, or we don't at least understand them in some way, then as those bits accumulate over time, like I didn't speak this subtle perception, I didn't speak this one, I didn't speak this one, and they accumulate over time, eventually it's a very, very clear voice or perception of just hearing voices. And maybe it's a matter of just learning what is trying to speak through us. And we just feel, and we just think in this society that just speaking the ego through us, we all have our own little private mixture, as David Bohm says, of these sound bites that we call me, but they're very similar. And then we just want to interact based on that. Well, when that breaks down, there's something else. We're still going to speak words. We're still going to be communicating in some way. It's just of a different quality. But we don't necessarily understand that. We've never been taught that. And so if that isn't merged with, or we're not in touch with that, then that sort of accumulates in our nervous system over time, and eventually the nervous system projects that we hear voices because we're not connecting with these other energies that produce sound through us, because we can speak as almost anything as human beings, just like the language of science. So in science, molecules can't speak, or some kind of process in physiology can't speak, but through the creation of the scientific language and the scientific inquiry and understanding, a scientist can write a paper and give voice to some of these processes. We wouldn't necessarily think, oh, the scientist is speaking the language of the molecules, or the scientist is speaking for the molecules. But in a way, they are. But we can do this with our own eyes without this structure of science. We're all scientists. We can all inquire into things and look and wonder. This is what we did as kids. We were all scientists as kids. So scientists speak an unspoken language, the language of how molecules interact. They put that into words. But we are all scientists. The biological pathway can't speak, but it can be communicated through investigation. And a bird can't speak to us, but by investigating the bird, we can speak as that bird in a way, because we can speak about our understanding of the bird. But we never try and understand the bird, because we just say, oh, that's a robin. So they say the bird is the word, but the word actually prevents us actually understanding the bird. So we've cultivated this scientific mind, and only a very small percentage of people become scientists, and we just rely on them to tell us what to think and do and eat and everything. But we can actually look with our own eyes, and I feel like part of map consciousness is this new mind flowering. It's a scientific mind. It's a mind that allows us to just look at something and understand. And that's what happens in map consciousness. And we look and we have some understanding of some sort. It's like a hypothesis. We're speaking our hypotheses. We're speaking, we see with our hypothesize. Our eyes become hypothesizing eyes and not opinionated eyes. So somebody in map consciousness is actually speaking in hypotheses. So, people speak in poetry, people speak in science, people speak in different types of languages, but there's this other language coming online which is hypothesizing based on direct observation. But we're so afraid to be right and wrong, and we don't share these things, and we don't see them because we blocked ourselves from seeing them, because we're just like, oh, somebody told me this type of bird is this, and that's what it is, and oh, I know something, congratulations, a bunch of my brain cells just died, because I'm not actually investigating. I'm just knowing things and not investigating the whole pattern, how everything interacts. We're so worried about being right that we can't hypothesize and speak this language of scientific hypotheses. And the thing is, if more of us could do this, it would be a lot faster than science, for sure. So this animal lady, Anna Breitenbach, she has a gift. She's honed it by learning that language. So we need to learn the language of speaking the moment, which is scientific hypotheses, and have hypothesize. Right now we just have eyes that project, but not eyes that hypothesize. We leave that to the scientists, and then we just project our egos onto everything and think that we know something. And that's what's speaking to us and through us when the whole share that language. So it will put people into map consciousness to map out this new language. So how many of us who've been labeled can do something like Anna Breitenbach in our own unique way? Who do we want to talk to? Who do we want to talk as? What energy, what creature, what animal, what process do we want to investigate and give voice to? Maybe that's part of the initial part is very chaotic, but we can hone that. We can feel into what we want to give voice to. And even myself, I have a tendency to maybe want to give voice to some of these things related to mental illness, and I've talked to myself about, I don't want to keep doing that forever. I don't know, maybe I will here and there, but there's a lot more out there than that. It's really learning how to see. And I remember giving a friend a shirt one time that says, it doesn't matter how you look, it's how you see. And that's very, very profoundly true. And I talk about dialogue, maybe being in dialogue with Gaia. Eventually we'll find out what in particular we want to put in front of us and speak as, because we're going to speak as what's in front of us. If there's psychiatrists in front of us all the time, we're going to speak the language of being a mental patient. So putting some of these other energies in front of us could be a way to move beyond it. And I feel sometimes like I speak as Gaia, I speak as the moment. Gaia speaks to me, speaks through me. I can look at something and feel like I have some level of understanding about something, and maybe it's not true, but it's a heck of a lot more interesting than just saying, oh look, a hummingbird. That's nice. It's so much more rich. So maybe one day I'll just refine which areas of Gaia, of the infinity of the cosmos, I'm in dialogue with. And that lady who has the gift of speaking with animals, she speaks shark. She speaks maybe every animal language if she observes long enough. So maybe at first it was a bit more challenging to understand that, but now she's likely able to connect with that very easily and quickly. So maybe it's not even a matter of choosing, it's just being able to speak in this gaiological way, and not gynological, gaiological. So that way we can give voice to almost anything, and then also hone our voice into moving through the moments that we want to speak as. I don't want to move through all my moments as speaking as a mental patient. We can give voice to the voiceless instead of hearing voices. It becomes so acute, and not acute as in acute illness, but just acutely obvious, like a voice that we're hearing when we've lost our connection to the subtle because nobody was speaking that language with us, and we were afraid of our own power to see and give voice to something else other than what I watched on TV last night. If we're able to speak in this way, we wouldn't need so much of that TV. And much of what I just said, I just made up by making a note to type something about that video that I watched of Anna Breitenbach. And these insights that seem more beyond the me, like as insights get more and more beyond the me, they can actually be scary. Like seeing that much can be scary. But I feel like over time, they become more strengthened in the nervous system, and the nervous system doesn't get scared. It's sort of like if I see something, not literally, but have a subtle perception of something that is 10 steps beyond the ego, it's actually going to scare the ego, and the nervous system will have a fear response, not even necessarily because that perception was fearful, but it's just so much further away from the ego, and the ego is trying to reassert itself to sort of bring consciousness back into the usual perceptual mode that is accepted as functioning in society. So that fear is partly intelligent because it's saying, don't go too much further perceiving, because the way you'll be received if you continue to see further and further beyond yourself, it might render you non-functional and blah, blah, blah. So over time, though, I feel like the nervous system gets more used to seeing beyond itself and doesn't have to scare consciousness back into the limited self in order for the limited self to come back online, because it's definitely necessary for some level of functioning. And the trouble is, too, we're so in this limited self and this level of functioning that when it breaks down, everything's so foreign because we haven't diversified our ways of perceiving and operating in reality. If we had 10 modes, not just ego, then if the ego broke down, we wouldn't even really notice. But right now we do really notice when it scrambles because of how it's always there. But the more it gets diversified, it can arise just like some kind of seemingly profound perception. If the ego's there, it's there. If there's a profound perception, it's there. But the nervous system can try to run away into profound perceptions because it does feel somewhat novel. It feels novel, just like watching a movie we've never seen, or then wanting to see the next episode or the next sequel or something because we want to see what's next. So perception, in a way, works a little bit like that. It builds. It's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And it goes stepwise outward from the ego and filling in all this context of being able to non-locally perceive, not perceive just through the locality of this centralized ego, but extend one's consciousness into being empathetic and moving into other beings and understanding them. And that's the thing too with this dialogical language. This dialogical language, it's more realizing we're consciousness. And if we're in that space of consciousness, consciousness speaks through us in that we're connected to all of consciousness, all sentient beings. We as humans can speak words, so we can speak words on behalf of the consciousness of any sentient creature, for sure. Even when we look at somebody and they're like this, and we look at them, I might say, I can see that you're sad. So we already do this, but we do it in the realm of ego, and that's okay if I say, oh, I see that you're sad. But if I say, I see that that bird is communicating to that one over there, and after they call to each other, they make this other call, and then they do this little celebration dance, people will be like, why do you even care about that? Like, why don't we just go shoot those birds and eat them? I don't know. But that's, again, just applying everything to how it benefits us in our ego hunger. But it's a hunger that can never be satiated. It can only be satiated by diversifying our consciousness portfolio. We're so interested in diversifying our financial portfolio or whatever, our resume, but we don't understand that we can diversify our consciousness portfolio, our perceptual portfolio, not just having perceptions of deception, which are opinions. And the thing, when one first gets connected with insight in map consciousness, in seeing subtle perceptions and giving voice to them, they're few and far between. So when one happens, it feels really profound. And then the nervous system gets a bit scared. But as they are more awakened, the nervous system doesn't get scared by that anymore. So to me, it's just the nervous system getting used to speaking insights and operating, perceiving consciousness, not just the content of one's ego, but all of consciousness, which includes the whole cosmos.
Hey, baby lizard.